The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. Let's read verses 33 through 37 from this great passage. Jesus says again, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one." Now, we're still talking about a passage where Jesus is teaching people about how to live pleasingly to the Lord in sort of personal type situations, day-to-day family situations, situations of meeting the public and being around other folks. And again, and you're going to see this 4 times, assuming we get to the verses we're planning on it tonight, where Jesus begins, "You have heard it said," "You have heard that it was said." Those kind of beginnings to the separate little passages we're considering. And as we talked about last week, he's reminding them of what the scribes and Pharisees had said, and they had twisted the law and really made it out to be just a form of legalism. So the scribes and the Pharisees were the teachers who Jesus was charging had done this incorrectly. It wasn't that what they said was wrong, but it's like, as we mentioned more than once, like some people are today, if you don't tell the whole truth, it can be very deceptive and can leave out something that, since we're talking here about oaths, all of you have seen on some kind of a TV show, or perhaps if you were in court as a visitor, when someone is sworn in to give testimony, that they will tell the truth, the whole truth, and what? Nothing but the truth. And as far as I know, they still close that out, at least around here, with a phrase, "So help you God." Well, that applies directly to what we're talking about, but it may surprise you what's behind what Jesus is saying here. But as we've already said, the Pharisees, scribes, had sort of twisted the meaning of this, and it comes from Exodus chapter 20 in the 10 Commandments. "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." That's what this is, the root of this teaching that Jesus is referring to. And he says, "You've heard it said to those of old, 'You shall not swear falsely. Perform your oaths to the Lord.' He says, 'I say to you, do not swear at all.'" Well, the thing again behind this, a man's word, a person's word, should be trustworthy. And certainly this would apply in particular to Christians. Christians should have such a love for truth that there be no need for an oath. We should not have to give or take an oath to back up the truth. Our character should be sufficient to confirm the words that we speak. And that's really what Jesus is saying in verse 37. "Let your yes be yes, and your no, no." You know, sometimes when we're talking to a child, or unfortunately also to some adults, "Did you do such and such?" "Well, yes, but." Well, yes, I did. But what are we saying? We're trying to justify something that we know shouldn't have done, typically. When we have to say, well, yeah, I did that, but let me tell you why. And I know I've mentioned this several times, but I never say something like that. I'm not reminded of the story that an older fellow told us many, many years ago. He was fishing in an area that said, plainly posted, no fishing. That's all right. The Lord told me I could. I don't think so. And yeah, I'm fishing, but, and you see, that's kind of, it's no matter what we say, if we are not being truthful, then we're not trustworthy. And that's what this comes down to. Jesus says, do not swear at all. Not by heaven, not by earth, not by Jerusalem, not even by your head. If you give a statement, it should be honorable. It should be truthful. We, again, should have a love for the truth. When you give your yes to be yes and your no to be no, then it takes out all the qualifying of, well, yes, but. It's just yes, no. Now, William Barclay made this statement. I want to read exactly as he said it. The truly good man will never need to take an oath. The truth of his sayings and the reality of his promises need no such guarantee. But the fact that oaths are still sometimes necessary is the proof that men are not good men, and this is not a good world. That's true. That's why when people are called into court as a witness, we have to take an oath to tell the truth. I don't know, it's been a long time, thankfully, since I was called to serve on a jury. I'm not advertising that I'm for hire or anything like that, but when you are selecting jury members, there's, especially if it's any kind of a trial where the two sides want to make sure they have as much as possible a fair and impartial jury, they'll ask a series of questions to the potential jurors. And hopefully you'll never be on trial. I'm just trying to make a point here. If you were on trial, what kind of jury member would you want? We ought to, as believers, want them to be all Christians. Because Christians ought to tell the truth. They ought to recognize the truth. They ought to listen for the truth. And then they ought to defend the truth, even as members of a jury. Unfortunately, they probably, I don't even know if they would allow lawyers to ask that question now. I haven't been a part of that process in so long, but I tell you, if my freedom or life or whatever was dependent on 12 people, I'd hope they were all born again. And I'd also pray for a judge that was, wouldn't you? But again, that's secondary to really what we're looking at here. So Jesus is telling us that how important the truth is, and there should be no oath required. Now, he's not forbidding the taking of an oath or the giving of an oath. There's a couple of illustrations where Paul made oaths, and so don't look at it in that way, but look at what he's really saying. The Pharisees had made it so that virtually every other name that was used was a false oath, and that's why Jesus went on to say, Do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it's God's throne, neither by the earth, it's his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, it's the city of the great king, nor even by your head. So our yes should be yes, our no should be no. Now let's look at the next passage, verses 38 to 42. Again, Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whosoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. And once again, you'll see it begins, you have heard that it was said. And of course, the law of Moses did teach an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And you'll find that in Exodus 21:24. But it had come to the place in Jesus' day where it was seen as an obligation to fulfill in personal relationships, that this was expected to do. And Jesus is actually teaching here the principle at times of accepting some evil acts against oneself. Now, this is one of the hardest things, at least in my opinion, for many, if not most, Christians to accept. I mean, a lot of times we have this attitude, I will not be run over. My child will not be treated like that. This will not be tolerated. And it's over something not nearly as much as a slap in the face. I'm just not going to be done wrong. I mean, I've heard, I would not want to even estimate the number of Christians I've heard say that over the years. It's just, that's just common. And we almost just, I don't know how, when we have that attitude, I don't know how we can relate it to what Jesus says here. Now, nobody wants to be done wrong. And Jesus is not saying that we should never defend ourselves. Never. He's not saying that. But he is saying that there's times where we have to accept it. There's times where it is not only acceptable, there's times where it should be expected. If a Christian today, in this world, is not in some way rejected, then we're either doing one of two things. We're in hibernation, or we're just going along with anything and everything. It appalls me today at what some Christians are applauding. And I don't mean Hollywood folks. I'm talking about Christians, people that you know, people that I know, what they are applauding as far as the behavior and the way that people are living. I said it's appalling. It's really pathetic. It's sad, and it really ought to break our hearts to see it. Jesus teaches the principle, though, here of accepting some evil acts. Now, just cutting right to the bottom of this, we're to depend on God to defend us. We're not to have the idea of, hey, you did me this way, I will get you. You might as well expect it. And we have to be careful, too, when someone does us wrong. We may not actually do anything for retribution or for retaliation, but maybe we say or even think, Your time's coming. You are going to get it. We may not do a thing. We may just point a finger. We may just say that as if, we're making a threat. And we've already talked about a couple of different illustrations where Jesus says pretty much if you think it's as bad as if you do it, or it's still a sin. I shouldn't say it. He didn't say that they were as bad, but he said it's still sinful. And it is sinful to think something if it's contrary to what God's Word is saying. Now, when you just think about this literally, look at what Jesus says in verse 39. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. We've heard since childhood, turn the other cheek. But is that something we really do? Now, think about that. When a person, and this, in the language of that day, and in the expressions, this would amount to a backhanded slap, not a punch in the nose. Okay? Not that would make a difference with a lot of people. But it was more of an insult than it was a physical injury kind of thing. And some people just, aren't going to be insulted. I mean, you got people today driving vehicles who will get mad at you and just about run you off the road. And then they've got their "In God We Trust" tag on the rear end of their vehicle, which I'm assuming the spouse must have got that. Surely wasn't the person driving. But I guess that's a different lesson too, isn't it? But, this was not a knockdown, drag-out fight that Jesus is talking about. He's talking about a personal insult kind of thing. Somebody just says something that's very insulting, could be degrading. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Don't just get all bristled up like a alley cat and, put out the claws. And you're not going to do that to me. He says, turn the other cheek. We have to learn to accept some things. Look at what Jesus did. Look at what he just accepted. We're supposed to be like him. And there's times where that's how we have to be. Now, even though this slap on the cheek was a deep insult, he does not mean that if someone comes at you with a baseball bat that you should take one lick on one side and say, here's the other one. Okay? That's the point that I'm trying to get across. And that's what we need to understand. This was an insult more than a personal, physical attack. And we shouldn't get all bent out of shape because somebody says something about us that's not kind or even untrue. People who are lost, people who are away from the Lord, they watch how Christians react to things. And they see us, at work, on our jobs, out in the yard, wherever we might be, and they see how we react when things don't go like we want them to go. They notice that. Don't think they don't. It might be somebody you've never spoken to, but they're watching and they see, and believe you me, they remember, because that's just how the devil operates in the minds of people. This insult slap that Jesus is talking about doesn't mean that it's pleasant, doesn't mean that it's something that we enjoy, doesn't mean that it's something we get up in the morning and I say, oh boy, I hope that happens today, I want to turn the other cheek. But it ought to be something that as Christians, as I said a minute ago, we just come to be prepared for and expect, and not get defeated, as Keith mentioned this past Sunday morning. You may have the door slammed on you from time to time. That doesn't mean you crawl back to the car and get in it and tuck your tail and say, well, I'm not doing that anymore. You keep going. You go on to another house. You keep on keeping on. Keep on doing the things that we know we're supposed to do. So again, Jesus is talking about our personal relationships. And he's not talking about the government and authorities from restraining or holding back evil actions. Let me read Romans 13, 1 through 4. And listen closely to verse 4. Paul says, let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resists the power, resists the ordinance of God. They that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. In other words, if we're doing what's right, we should not have to at all fear government. Hopefully, that's going to stay that way. It's something that as Americans and as Christians, we ought to be very concerned about and pray faithfully about. Will you then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he, referring to a government official, is the minister of God to you for good. But if you do that which is evil, be afraid. For he bears not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him who does evil. So, again, just to make sure you understand, Jesus is not saying that someone commits a great crime against you or someone in your family. I mean, some murder or whatever. It doesn't mean you should, well, I'm going to turn the other cheek. We don't want to file charges. Well, see, that's a state crime. That's a crime against the state as well in our society. But that's not what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about, remember, just things that most people have to deal with day to day. Personal insults. People just saying things that they ought not say. But they're going to say them. It's how we deal with them. That's what Jesus is talking about. Romans 12:21, Paul says, do not be overcome by evil, overcome evil with good. We're always to give more than is required, and it's a choice of love. That's what Jesus is saying when he says there, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Now, again, under the Mosaic law, the outer cloak that a man wore could not be taken from someone. And even Jesus' disciples, if they were sued for their tunics, that's the outer garment. Jesus says, give it to him. Give it to him. He knew what the Mosaic law said. But see, Jesus is going beyond the law. He's fulfilling the law. He says, give it to him. Don't hold it back. Give to him who asks you. And from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn it away. That passage ends. One more thing, though, backing up to verse 41. It says, whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. During the time that Jesus is saying this, Judea was under military occupation by Rome. Now think about that. We don't live, as much as we might complain and criticize, we're not under the occupation of some foreign government. Israel was. Rome had occupied them. And under the law of that day, a Roman soldier could command a Jew to carry his personal military supplies I don't know if they were in a pack or what, but let's just say for our convenience they were. He could order a Jewish person to carry that for 1 mile. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. He says, whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with them too. Don't stop at 1, take it 2 miles. Now again, this goes against how we feel. This goes against, we just, that bristling about, I'll not be done that way. What's that a sign of? It's a sign of pride. No humility. Just, it's a sign of maybe at times seeing parents who just insisted, you will not be done that way. And a lot of times it turns out that it was a parent that was pretty hard-headed too. I hate to say it that way, but I saw that so many times. Remember a parent conference we had many years ago, and the daddy came in and just really was ugly to his child. Not to the teachers, but to his child. And I went to school with him. That child wasn't near the trouble he was. Sad. It was sad. I mean, the man was grown, had a child in the 8th grade, and didn't have sense enough to know, or care enough to know, what he was doing. And it was like, I better not say any more. I don't want to do anything to identify the person, but you got to sometimes just stop and think and be careful about how you react, and especially if it's someone close to you. If compelled to go 1 mile, go with them 2. And then the next area, verses 43 to 47, Jesus is talking about the law of loving your neighbor. And again, he starts, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? You have heard, Jesus says again, and this is from Leviticus 19:18, the Mosaic law commands, you shall love your neighbor. But some teachers in Jesus' day had created their own evil addition to the law and had also put in there, hate your enemy. Well, Jesus goes about as opposite from that as you can. He says we're to love our enemies, and in saying this, he admits and understands that we will have enemies. And again, if we don't have people who, in some fashion, oppose us, we're either, doing a Yogi Bear imitation, or we're just agreeing with everybody and compromising the truth. And we should be as agreeable as possible. We should not be a people who seek to cause differences, but we should never compromise what God's Word says either. In obeying the Lord, in what Jesus says in these 5 verses, we demonstrate our kinship to God. We are His children. We are imitating Him. Notice what Jesus says, that you may be sons or children of your Father in heaven. Now, it's not saying that you have to prove obedience before the Lord will save you, or that if you disobey once after you're saved, then you're no longer saved. Jesus isn't saying that. But, we've talked at length how we are supposed to be like the Lord. We're supposed to being a Christian means we're Christ-like. Living a godly life means we're like God. And we've seen some very clear illustrations how we can be unlike God. What if every time somebody insulted God, he bristled and just said, you'll not get away with that? He has the power and the authority to do something about it. You and I may just make threats. God can do more than make threats. And maybe there's times where God has just kind of gotten tired of people making threats. And he did do something, or saying things, and he did do something about it. But there's an interesting thing about these verses that we have here, especially verses 46 and 47. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? In other words, now remember, tax collectors are probably the most despised people in the society that Jesus lived in. He said they do that. That they love people that love them. If you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Even the tax collectors do this. Well, what is it that you and I are doing that a lost person can't do? Well, I go to church every week. So can a lost person. They go 3 times a week. Think about it. You probably went to church for a while before you were saved. I doubt that any one of us here tonight just, accepted the Lord, became a Christian the very first time we can remember going to church, attending a church service. If we only love those who love us, what are we demonstrating in the way of faithfulness to the Lord? Now, when he talks about loving your enemies, in the way that he's talking about that, that's something that a lost person can't do. They don't have the ability within them. They may be good people, but they can't love like Jesus is telling us we're supposed to love. It's not possible for a person to do that. We must take this seriously and realize that it's so important that we return the love that God has given to us, and we do that by loving Him, yes, but by demonstrating it towards people who are really not lovable. You think the Lord just started loving you once you came to know Him? No, if He had done it that way, you'd never been saved. He loved us when we were lost, when we were unlovable, and He's always faithful. We often, as Christians claim that we've got something that other people don't have. Well, that's true, but it also ought to be something that we are not hiding and not afraid and ashamed to demonstrate. And, it's not always hidden by anger or drunkenness or some kind of rabble-rousing behavior. Sometimes it's hidden just by pouting, sulking. We don't get our way. We don't see what we want. We just sort of withdraw and pull back. And, is that God? Or I should say, is that godly? Is that Christ-like? I can't imagine Jesus ever pouting. Can you? Or sulking. I can show you several accounts where he didn't get his way as far as what he wanted to see in people. But he just always continued to love and continued to obey God and be faithful. That's what we have to do as well. All right. We're going to stop right there. And as we said, there's only one verse left in this chapter, but that's where we'll pick up because it's a great verse to start with next time.